northern stretches of the savanna, where the tall grass bent like waves beneath the dry wind and the moon rose enormous over the horizon, there stood a village so old that even the elders argued about when it was first built. Some said their ancestors settled there after following a trail of elephants across the desert. Others whispered that the village had not been built at all, but had grown around a sacred tree long before people learned to write their stories. At the center of this village stood a massive baobab tree whose trunk was so wide that 10 men holding hands could not encircle it. Its bark was gray and cracked like ancient stone, and its branches reached out like skeletal fingers toward the sky. Children were warned never to climb it after sunset, and hunters avoided walking near it at night because the elders said the baobab was older than memory and that something beneath its roots had never slept. For generations, the villagers lived simple lives under the watch of that tree. They farmed millet and sorghum, tended goats, and gathered around fires each night while elders told stories of spirits, ancestors, and creatures that roamed the darkness between worlds. But among all the stories, there was one that no elder liked to finish. They would begin speaking of the drums beneath the baobab, then suddenly fall silent, staring into the fire as if remembering something terrible. The children would beg them to continue, but the elders would shake their heads and say that some stories were not meant to be awakened. A young man named Kito had grown up hearing fragments of this forbidden tale. Unlike the other villagers, he had always been curious about the things people feared. Kito was tall and quiet, with eyes that watched everything. His father had been the village hunter before disappearing years earlier, during a drought that drove animals far from the land. Some said his father had wandered too far into the wilderness. Others whispered that he had gone looking for answers about the strange sounds that had begun echoing from the earth that same year. Kito had been only 10 years old then, but he still remembered the night his father left. The wind had been still, the moon full, and somewhere beneath the ground a faint rhythmic sound had pulsed like a distant heartbeat. For years afterward, the villagers pretended nothing had happened. Yet every now and then, especially during the hottest nights when the air pressed heavily against the skin, the earth would tremble ever so slightly. If someone placed their ear to the ground near the baobab tree, they could hear it clearly, a deep, hollow drumming that rose slowly from the darkness below. Most people refused to acknowledge it, but Kito never forgot. One night, many years later, when Kito had become a young man, the drumming returned stronger than it had ever been before. The evening had begun peacefully. The villagers gathered around cooking fires while the sky darkened into a sea of stars. Hyenas laughed somewhere beyond the hills, and the scent of roasted maize drifted through the air. Kito sat beside his mother, listening to the stories of the elders when he felt it, a faint vibration beneath his feet. At first he thought it was only his imagination, but then the bowls on the ground began to rattle softly. The drumming had begun again. Boom, boom, boom. Slow and heavy, like the beating of an enormous heart buried deep beneath the soil. The villagers froze. No one spoke. Even the hyenas fell silent. Then the oldest woman in the village, Grandmother Naya, slowly stood from her stool. Her back was bent with age, but her eyes were sharp as knives. She stared toward the baobab tree with an expression that chilled everyone who saw it. "It has awakened," she whispered. The drumming continued. Boom, boom, boom. Kito stood and walked toward the center of the village. Several elders tried to stop him, but he shook them off gently. "You must not go there, Grandmother Naya said. The earth remembers what lies beneath. But Kito's curiosity had burned for too many years to be silenced now. If the drumming truly came from beneath the Baobab, then perhaps the tree held answers about his father's disappearance. Perhaps it held answers about the thing that had haunted the elders' stories. As he approached the tree, the vibrations grew stronger. Dust trembled on the ground, and the enormous trunk seemed to hum quietly, as though the roots themselves were alive. Kito placed his hand against the bark. The drumming stopped instantly. Silence fell across the entire village. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, from somewhere deep below the roots, a whisper rose through the wood of the tree and into Kito's bones. Not a sound heard with the ears, a voice heard inside the mind. Finally, it said. Kito jerked his hand away, stumbling backward. The whisper had not sounded human. It was slow and ancient, like something that had forgotten how language worked. The villagers gasped as a crack formed in the earth near the base of the Baobab. At first it was small, no wider than a finger, but the crack spread quickly, zigzagging across the soil like lightning trapped in the ground. Dust rose into the air as the earth slowly began to split open. Kito felt the vibration again, but now it was not just a drumbeat. Now it sounded like footsteps, heavy, approaching. Boom, boom, boom. Grandmother Naya screamed. "Leave the tree," she shouted, "before it hears you." But it was already too late. The ground burst open with a violent rumble, sending villagers stumbling backward in terror. From the darkness, beneath the roots came a gust of air that smelled of damp earth and something far older, something that had not tasted the night sky for centuries. The crack widened into a jagged hole, and from within it, a faint red glow began to pulse like an ember buried beneath ash. Kito stood frozen, because from the depths of that hole, he could hear something else now. Not drums, not footsteps, breathing, slow, ancient, awake, and then a shape moved beneath the roots of the Baobab. The villagers fled from the tree in terror, scattering across the open ground like startled birds. Mothers grabbed their children, elders stumbled toward their huts, and goats bleated wildly as they pulled against their ropes. But Kito could not move. His eyes remained locked on the dark hole beneath the Baobab, where the red glow pulsed slowly like the dying heart of a fire. From within the hole came the sound again. Breathing. Inhale. Exhale. Each breath stirred the dust around the roots. Kito felt a strange pressure building inside his skull, as though invisible fingers were pressing against his thoughts. The whisper returned, sliding through his mind like smoke. "You hear me?" it said. Kito staggered backward, clutching his head. The voice had no emotion, no anger or kindness. It simply existed, ancient and patient. "What are you?" Kito whispered. The whisper seemed amused. "A listener?" The ground trembled again. Something enormous shifted beneath the earth, causing the Baobab's massive trunk to creak like an old ship in heavy waves. A long moment passed before the whisper spoke again. "You touched the tree. You woke the roots. Few have done that and lived." Kito's heart pounded violently in his chest. Behind him, he could hear villagers shouting his name, but their voices sounded distant, as though the whisper had wrapped the world in thick cloth. "Where is my father?" Kito demanded suddenly. The whisper paused. Then the breathing deepened. He came here many seasons ago. Kito's stomach twisted. What happened to him? Another pause. He listened too closely. Before Kito could speak again, the earth around the hole shifted violently. The red glow brightened, revealing something moving beneath the surface. Something long and coiled that seemed to slide between the roots of the baobab like a serpent made of shadow. But it was far too large to be a snake. The villagers watched from a distance, too terrified to approach, yet unable to look away. Grandmother Naya fell to her knees, muttering ancient prayers under her breath. "The listener has awakened," she said. The stories were true. Kito's eyes widened. "The listener?" Grandmother Naya nodded slowly, her face pale in the firelight. "Long before our village existed," she said, "this land belonged to spirits older than humanity. One of them lived beneath the baobab. It did not walk the world like other creatures. It stayed buried, listening to the footsteps of every living thing above it, listening to every secret spoken in the night." The ground trembled again. "And if it heard something it wanted," she continued, "it would take the one who spoke it." Kito turned slowly toward the hole. "Did it take my father?" The whisper returned instantly. "He offered himself." Kito felt the air leave his lungs. "No," he said weakly, but the whisper continued. "He wanted answers. Humans always do." The red glow flared suddenly brighter, and the shadow beneath the roots rose higher. For the first time, Kito could see its shape clearly. It was enormous, larger than an elephant, with a body that seemed to twist endlessly through the darkness below. Its surface looked like black stone, polished smooth by centuries of movement. But what frightened Kito most were the eyes. Hundreds of them. Small glowing eyes opening slowly across the creature's body like embers, awakening in a dying fire. Each one stared directly at him. "You carry his curiosity," the whisper said. "That is why the tree called you." Kito's legs trembled, but he forced himself to stand his ground. "What do you want from me?" The creature beneath the earth shifted again. "Nothing." Another pause. "Yet." Suddenly the ground cracked again, widening the hole beneath the baobab. One massive coil of the creature rose slowly toward the surface, pushing aside roots thicker than a man's arm. The villagers screamed as the shape emerged halfway into the moonlight. It was not a serpent. It was something far worse. Its body resembled stone carved into the shape of a snake, but along its sides were ridges like ancient drums. As the creature moved, those ridges struck the earth, producing the deep rhythmic sound the villagers had heard for years. Boom, boom, boom. The drums beneath the baobab. Kito realized with horror that the drumming had never been a signal. It had been the creature moving in its sleep. And now it was awake. The listener raised its massive head just above the hole. Its eyes flickered across the village, studying every face. "I have listened for centuries," the whisper said. "I know your fears, your lies, your secrets." The villagers fell silent, because deep inside their minds, each of them heard the same whisper, and each of them felt their darkest memory stir. Kito stepped forward, despite the terror flooding his body. "You said my father came here," he said. "Where is he?" The creature paused. Then slowly one section of its massive body shifted. Something fell from the darkness beneath it, a human skull. Kito collapsed to his knees. The whisper softened slightly. He asked for knowledge. I gave it to him. What knowledge? Kito whispered hoarsely. The creature's eyes glowed brighter. That the world beneath your feet is far older than your kind, and that the earth remembers every secret ever spoken. The wind suddenly rose across the savanna, rattling the baobab's dry branches. And tonight, the listener continued, the earth has heard something new. All the eyes turned toward Kito again. You. Kito knelt in the dust, staring at the skull that lay beside the cracked earth. His hands trembled as he reached toward it. Though the bone was weathered and brittle, he recognized the carved markings along the jaw, symbols his father had etched long ago as a part of an old hunter's tradition. There was no doubt. His father had died beneath the baobab. A cold numbness spread through Kito's chest. Yet beneath the grief, there burned something stronger. Anger. He stood slowly and faced the enormous creature. You killed him. The listener's eyes flickered. No. The whisper echoed through every mind in the village. He chose to remain. Kito clenched his fists. Why? The creature's body shifted, causing the ground to vibrate again with the deep drumbeat that had haunted the village for years. Because knowledge has a price. The whisper grew heavier. And once the earth reveals its secrets, the listener cannot return unchanged. Grandmother Naya approached cautiously, leaning on her staff. Though fear filled her face, she spoke with the authority of someone who understood ancient things. You must return to the earth, she said to the creature. You have slept here long enough. The living cannot share the land with you. The listener's eyes turned toward her. I do not share the land, it replied. I am the land. The ground trembled violently. Across the savanna, distant birds burst into flight as cracks began forming in the soil around the village. The baobab tree groaned as its roots shifted, revealing more of the enormous creature coiled beneath it. Kito realized with horror that the listener's body stretched far beyond the tree. It wound deep beneath the entire village like a buried river of stone. If you wake fully, Grandmother Naya whispered, you will destroy us all. The listener did not deny it. I have slept for centuries, it said calmly. But tonight, the earth has grown restless. Kito suddenly understood. The creature had not awakened on its own. He had awakened it by touching the tree, by seeking answers, the same way his father had. What happens now? Kito asked quietly. The creature's countless eyes studied him. You will choose. A heavy silence settled across the village. What choice? Kito asked. The whisper came slowly. You carry your father's curiosity. The earth hears it. I can take you below, as I took him. You will learn the secrets buried beneath every mountain and river. You will hear the memories of the world itself. Kito felt the weight of those words. But if you refuse? He asked. The creature's eyes dimmed slightly. Then I will return to sleep. Kito frowned. That sounds simple. It is not. The ground trembled harder, because the earth is already waking. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed across the savanna. Another section of ground collapsed near the edge of the village, revealing deep tunnels twisting through the soil like enormous veins. The listener's body shifted beneath them. If I sleep again, it said, the earth will seal these wounds, but the one who woke me must remain to guard the silence. Kito felt dread tighten his chest. You mean? Yes. The whisper grew soft. You will become the new listener. The villagers gasped. Grandmother Naya shook her head fiercely. No, that is not a life for a human. The listener responded calmly. It is the only way the world remains balanced. Kito looked down at his father's skull. He finally understood what his father had discovered that night long ago. Some knowledge could not be carried back to the living world. Some knowledge demanded a sacrifice. The wind rustled through the grass as Kito lifted the skull gently from the ground. You stayed to protect them, he murmured to his father. Then he looked up at the creature. If I agree, will the village be safe? Yes. And you will sleep again? For another century. Kito took a deep breath. Then he stepped toward the hole beneath the baobab. Behind him, the villagers cried out in protest, but he did not stop. Because he knew something they did not. The earth was still trembling. And if the listener rose fully, the savanna itself might split apart. He reached the edge of the hole and turned one last time toward the village he had known all his life. Take care of my mother, he said softly. Grandmother Naya wept as she nodded. Then Kito faced the darkness beneath the roots. I will listen, he said. The listener's eyes glowed gently. Then the earth will rest. The creature's massive coils slowly withdrew into the depths, creating a path leading downward into darkness older than memory. Kito stepped into the tunnel. The moment his feet touched the stone below, the red glow faded and the cracks in the earth began sealing themselves like healing wounds. The baobab tree stood tall once more. The ground grew still. The drumming stopped. Above the village, the night returned to silence. But sometimes, on the hottest nights when the air hangs heavy and the moon glows bright over the savanna, the villagers still claim they can hear something if they place their ears against the roots of the ancient baobab. Not drums, not breathing, but whispers. The voice of a young man listening to the secrets of the earth forever.